He found her standing in that boardroom, shaking hands with the man who just bought his entire empire, and the smile on her face, calm, victorious, unbothered, told him everything he needed to know. She hadn't just moved on. She'd been planning this for 3 years. While he was busy thinking he was untouchable, she was quietly becoming the one person who could destroy him with a signature. And she did, without raising her voice, without shedding a tear. Just one decision that erased everything he thought he'd built, because the most dangerous opponent isn't the one screaming threats. It's the one who smiles, stays silent, and dismantles your world piece by piece while you're too arrogant to notice. Before we go further, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if you're new here, subscribe right now, because what you're about to hear will change how you see loyalty, power, and the cost of underestimating the wrong person. What makes someone believe they're irreplaceable? How does a woman endure years of humiliation without cracking, without breaking, without giving any sign that she's 10 steps ahead? And what kind of reckoning waits for a man who mistakes patience for weakness? This isn't a story about infidelity. This is about silent warfare. The kind that doesn't need courtrooms or confrontations. The kind where by the time you realize you're losing, the war is already over. And you lost before you even knew you were fighting. So ask yourself this. Have you ever been so certain someone would never leave that you forgot they were choosing to stay? Because that illusion, that comfort, that's exactly what cost him everything. And what she did, it wasn't revenge. It was poetry. Dante and Zara were the couple everyone whispered about with envy. He was 47, sharp-suited, commanding, the kind of man who walked into rooms and expected silence. He owned a private equity firm that brokered deals across 5 continents. Ruthless, calculated, the type who believed wealth was proof of superiority. Zara was 36, quieter, magnetic in a way that didn't announce itself but left impressions. She was a corporate restructuring consultant for a global advisory group, razor-sharp, strategic, the kind of woman who could dismantle a failing company and rebuild it in 6 months without breaking a sweat. They'd been married for 13 years, on the surface perfection. Penthouse overlooking the city, private jet access, charity galas where they posed for photos that made strangers believe in soulmates. But photographs lie. And beneath the champagne smiles and designer gowns, their marriage had been rotting for half a decade. Dante had been unfaithful so many times it became routine. Late nights became long weekends. Business trips became extended disappearances with women whose faces blurred together in his memory. The affairs weren't discreet, they were careless. His associates knew, his clients knew. Even Zara's own sister had seen him at a resort in Monaco with a woman young enough to be his daughter, and when she told Zara, Zara had simply nodded and said, "I know." That response haunted her sister for months. No tears, no fury. Just acknowledgement. Like she was filing information away in some mental vault no one else could access. And that's what Dante never understood. He interpreted her composure as defeat. He thought her silence meant she had nowhere to go, no options, no leverage. He thought she stayed because she needed him. He was catastrophically wrong. Things began shifting about 14 months before the collapse. Zara started receiving calls from a man named Jinsu Han. He was the founder and CEO of a multinational conglomerate based in Seoul with operations in 12 countries. 56 years old, legendary in financial circles, known for being fair but merciless, strategic but honourable. At first, the calls were transactional. Zara's firm had been contracted to consult on a merger his company was navigating. She was the lead advisor. They'd discuss valuations, synergies, risk mitigation, standard corporate language. But over time, the conversations deepened. They'd talk about philosophy, about the loneliness of leadership, about what it feels like to be respected professionally, but invisible personally. Zara never intended for it to become anything more. And truthfully, it wasn't romantic. Not initially. It was recognition, something she hadn't felt in a decade. Jin-soo listened when she spoke. He asked for her opinion and actually waited for the answer. He didn't interrupt her, didn't mansplain her own expertise back to her, didn't treat her insights like pleasant background noise. And for someone like Zara, who'd spent 13 years being ignored by the man who vowed to honor her, that recognition felt like oxygen after drowning. Dante noticed the calls. Of course he did. But he wasn't threatened. He actually bragged about it during a golf outing with investors. He said, "Some Korean billionaire's been calling my wife for advice? Smart guy. He's learning from the best. Too bad she's already mine." One of his partners had asked, "Doesn't that concern you?" Dante laughed. "Why would it?" "She's not stupid enough to throw away everything I've given her." That arrogance, that absolute certainty that Zara would never abandon him, became the crack in his foundation. Because while Dante was rotating through hotel suites with interchangeable women, Zara was reconstructing herself with surgical precision. She started taking on international projects, traveling more, expanding her network. She got headhunted twice, turned down both offers, but used them to negotiate a better position with her current firm. She opened offshore accounts, consulted 3 different divorce attorneys in 3 different states. She documented everything: timestamps, locations, photos, not emotionally, forensically, like she was preparing a case she knew she'd eventually need. And through it all, Dante noticed nothing. He thought everything was normal. He thought he was still in control. It was a Wednesday evening in late November when Dante decided to follow her. He'd returned home unexpectedly, unusual for him, and found the penthouse empty. No note, no text. He called her, straight to voicemail. For the first time in years, something shifted in his chest. Not guilt, paranoia. So he checked her location. She'd shared it with him years ago during some forgotten argument about safety. And there it was, a pin dropped outside a luxury hotel in the financial district, not just any hotel. The hotel, the one where Jin-soo Han was known to stay when he was in the city. Dante felt his jaw tighten, not with sadness, with possession. Because in his mind, despite having betrayed her hundreds of times, she was still his property. So he drove. 40 minutes through traffic that felt like hours. When he arrived, he parked across the street, engine off, watching the entrance like a predator waiting for prey. 53 minutes passed. Then he saw them. They emerged from the lobby together. Jin-soo said something. Zara laughed genuinely, the kind of laugh Dante hadn't heard from her in years. They weren't touching, weren't holding hands, but the ease between them, the comfort, the way she tilted her head when he spoke, it was intimacy without contact. And that's what destroyed him. Dante felt something he hadn't felt in over a decade. Fear. Not because she was cheating. He didn't even know if she was. But because for the first time he realized she didn't need him anymore. And that terrified him more than any affair ever could. He sat in that car for another hour, watching them stand in the lobby, talking, smiling, existing in some private world he had no access to. When Zara finally got into her car and drove away, Dante didn't follow her. He just sat there, staring at the hotel, trying to process what he'd witnessed. And for the first time in 13 years, Dante felt like a stranger to his own wife. He confronted her the next morning. Zara was at the kitchen island, reading something on her tablet, dressed for a meeting, flawless as always. Dante walked in and said, "I saw you last night." She didn't flinch, didn't look up. She just said, "Okay." That wasn't the reaction he'd prepared for. He'd expected panic, excuses, defensiveness, something. But she just sat there, calm, waiting. So he pushed. "You were with him?" "With Han." She nodded. "I was..." "And you weren't going to mention that?" Zara finally looked up and her expression was so neutral it unnerved him. She said, "Why would I? You've never mentioned any of yours." That stopped him cold. He tried to recover. That's different. I'm talking about you sneaking around with some... Some what? She interrupted, her voice still calm. Some man who actually respects me? Some man who values my expertise? Some man who doesn't treat me like decorative furniture? Dante's face flushed. You're my wife. And that's when Zara smiled, not with warmth, with finality. She said, I've been your wife for 13 years, Dante. And you've spent at least 10 of them acting like I'm optional. So forgive me if I don't care that you suddenly remember I exist. He stammered. I never said you were optional. She closed her tablet, set it down gently, looked him directly in the eyes. You didn't have to say it. You showed me. Every late night. Every lie. Every time you came home smelling like someone else and expected me to pretend I didn't notice, you showed me exactly how optional I was. He asked, So what, you're leaving? She stood up, collected her things. I already did. You just didn't notice. And then she walked out. No slamming doors, no tears, just exit. And Dante stood in that kitchen, alone, realizing for the first time that silence wasn't submission. It was preparation. Over the next 3 months, Dante's world didn't just crack. It imploded. First, his firm lost 2 major clients. No explanation. Just polite emails about shifting priorities. Then another. Then another. Deals that were supposed to close suddenly fell through. Partnerships dissolved. His reputation, which he'd assumed was bulletproof, started crumbling. He made calls. Most went unreturned. The few people who did answer were vague, uncomfortable. Finally, one of his oldest contacts told him the truth. Word had spread. Not about Zara. About him. About the affairs. About how he'd once publicly mocked Jin-Soo Han at a conference in Singapore, called him old-fashioned and past his prime, not realizing that half the room had worked with Han and respected him more than they'd ever respect Dante. Reputation, it turns out, isn't built on success. It's built on character. And Dante's character had been exposed. At home, things were worse. Zara had moved into the guest suite. She was polite, professional, distant. She didn't argue, didn't cry. She simply coexisted with him like a business partner waiting out a contract. He tried apologizing. Multiple times. But every time he started, she'd just give him this exhausted look and say, I don't need your apology, Dante. I need you to understand why it doesn't matter anymore. And he couldn't argue with that, because deep down he knew she was right. He wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He was sorry he got caught. Sorry she finally stopped pretending. Then, about 11 weeks after that night outside the hotel, Dante discovered the truth. And it shattered him. Zara wasn't having an affair with Jin-Soo Han. She was working with him. Han's conglomerate had offered her a position, not just any position, Chief Strategy Officer, a role created specifically for her, 8-figure compensation package, equity stake, global authority, and she'd been negotiating it for 8 months, not secretly, quietly, because she didn't owe Dante an explanation for building her own empire. The announcement went public on a Thursday morning. Dante saw it on his phone while sitting in his office. There was a photo, Zara and Jin-Soo at a press conference in Seoul. She looked powerful, confident, free. And standing behind them, barely visible in the frame, were members of Han's executive board, including 2 of Dante's former clients. That's when it clicked. The lost deals, the dissolved partnerships. It wasn't coincidence. It was calculation. Zara hadn't just left him. She'd systematically dismantled his professional network, not out of spite, but because those clients respected her more than they ever respected him. And when she moved, they moved with her. Dante tried calling her that day, blocked. He tried emailing, auto-reply. He showed up at her new office, security escorted him out. And as he walked back to his car, alone, humiliated, irrelevant, he finally understood. He hadn't lost her because she betrayed him. He'd lost her because he'd spent 13 years betraying her. and she'd spent that time becoming someone who didn't need him at all. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. No drama, just paperwork. Zara kept the penthouse. Dante moved into a condo downtown. A fraction of the size, a fraction of the life. His firm survived, barely, but the respect was gone. People were professional but cold. He'd learned the hard way that power without integrity is just noise. Zara, meanwhile, became a legend. She transformed Hans' operations, expanded into new markets, spoke at global summits. She didn't trash Dante publicly, didn't need to. She simply erased him from relevance by becoming everything he'd never let her be. One evening, about 8 months post-divorce, Dante saw her at an industry event. She was there with Jin Soo, not as a couple, as equals, partners, colleagues, but the way they stood together, the mutual respect, the ease, it was everything Dante had never given her. He thought about approaching, saying something, apologizing properly. But what could he say that would matter now? So he just watched her from across the room. Watched her laugh, watched her command attention without demanding it, watched her exist in a world she'd built without him. And then he left. Because some mistakes don't get redemption arcs, some people don't come back, and sometimes the only thing left to do is accept that you were the villain in someone else's victory story. So here's the final question. Have you ever been so sure of your power that you forgot the person beside you was building their own? Have you ever taken someone's loyalty for granted so completely that you missed the moment they stopped being loyal and started being strategic? Dante thought success made him untouchable. He thought Zara's silence meant surrender. But silence wasn't weakness. It was a countdown. And by the time he heard the alarm, the explosion had already happened. This story isn't about revenge. It's about reclamation. It's about the quiet, devastating power of someone who decides they're done being underestimated. Zara didn't need to destroy Dante. She just needed to become herself. And that, in the end, was the most powerful move she could have made. So if you've ever felt overlooked, undervalued, or taken for granted, remember this. Your silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. And when you're ready, when you've planned every move, when you've built everything you need, you won't need to announce your exit. They'll just wake up one day and realize you're gone. And by then, you'll be untouchable. What do you think? Could Dante have changed if he'd realized sooner? Or was Zara right to execute her plan without hesitation? And if you were in her position, would you have done the same, or would you have confronted him earlier? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We're genuinely curious about your perspective. And if this story moved you, if it made you rethink power, loyalty, and consequences, then hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss our next story. Because next time, we're diving into a tale about a woman who discovered her husband's secret, and instead of confronting him, she used it to build an empire that made him irrelevant. Thanks for watching. And remember, never mistake someone's silence for weakness. Sometimes it's the sound of a plan coming together, and when it does, it's unstoppable.